Have you ever had someone plan your entire life before you even figured out who you were? Not suggest it. Not guide it. Plan it. Like a business deal. My name is Fiona Ashford. I'm 28 years old. And my father owns more real estate in Manhattan than some companies you've actually heard of. I grew up in a penthouse on the Upper East Side that looked down at Central Park like it was part of our front yard. And if you asked my father, it basically was. People hear billionaire dad and think trust funds. Luxury. Freedom. Let me save you some time. It's not freedom. It's control with better furniture. In my family, nothing just happens. Everything is arranged. Schools. Internships. Friendships. Even the way you speak in public. I didn't choose my college. I was placed there. I didn't pick my major. It was aligned with long-term strategy. I didn't even pick my first job. I was given a role at my father's company before I graduated. I like it was a prize I was supposed to be grateful for. And growing up, I thought that was normal. My father, Richard Ashford, doesn't believe in randomness. He believes in leverage. Every person in his life is either an asset or a liability. And he raised me to understand that I was both. When I was 16, he sat me down at the same dining table where he closes deals worth more than most people will see in a lifetime. No yelling, no emotion, just calm. Controlled delivery, like he was explaining market trends. He said, "Love is a luxury for people who can't afford better options. In this family, we marry for advantage." I remember nodding like I understood, even though I didn't. At 16, you don't think about marriage as a merger. You think about prom and bad decisions and maybe falling for the wrong person just because they smile at you the right way. But in my house, there was no wrong person. There were only unacceptable choices. By the time I was in my 20s, I knew the script by heart. Smile at the right people. Build the right connections. Stay visible, but not controversial. Be impressive, but not threatening. It's a weird balance. Being raised to succeed, but never outshine the man who built the empire. I got my MBA from Columbia. Not because I dreamed of it, but because it checked the right box. I worked in marketing at Ashford Properties. Sitting in meetings where men twice my age would look at me like I was either decoration or a test. And every time I spoke, I could feel my father watching, measuring, deciding if I was adequate that day. That word stuck with me. Adequate. Not excellent. Not impressive. Just acceptable. I spent years trying to earn a reaction that never came. You'd think after a while, you'd stop caring. You don't. You just get better at pretending it doesn't matter. And then there was the other part of my life. The part that looked perfect from the outside. Charity galas. Private events. Dinner parties where everyone knew exactly what to say and what not to say. The women wore brands you don't pronounce correctly unless you've been trained. And the men talked about deals like they were discussing the weather. I knew all of them. I grew up with their kids. Same schools. Same summers. Same expectations. And somewhere along the way, I realized something that no one ever says out loud. None of it was real. Every friendship came with conditions. Every invitation had a purpose. People didn't ask how you were. They asked what you were doing, who you were seeing, how it affected their position. It's exhausting. Being part of a world where even your personality feels like a negotiation. And in the middle of all that, my father had already planned the next step for me. Marriage. Not someday. Not when you're ready. It was already in motion. He had a list. Of course he did. Families that made sense. Names that would strengthen the Ashford brand. Sons who had the right background. The right education. The right kind of ambition. I'd met most of them at events over the years. They were polished. Predictable. And about as interesting as a corporate memo. One name kept coming up more than the others. Harrison Wells III. Yes. That's actually his name. I wish I was joking. Our families had been circling each other for years. which is a polite way of saying they were waiting for the right moment to turn two people into a contract. He was fine. Smart. Well-spoken. Exactly what my father wanted. And that was the problem. There was nothing wrong with him. There was just nothing real either. I remember one dinner in particular. About 8 months ago. We were sitting at that same table. The one that always feels more like a boardroom than a place you eat. My father was talking about a merger. Something big. Something that apparently involved Harrison's family. He didn't look at me when he said it. He never does when it's something important. "I've arranged a meeting for you this Saturday," he said, cutting into his steak like he was signing paperwork. "You and Harrison should spend some time together. Get familiar. Get familiar." Like we were two companies about to integrate. I set my fork down and just looked at him. There wasn't even a question in his voice. It wasn't, "Would you like to meet him?" It was, "This is happening." That's when it hit me. My life wasn't just influenced by my father. It was scheduled. Every decision I thought I'd made on my own had been nudged, shaped, or outright decided long before I got there. And this was the final step. Marriage wasn't about love or timing, or even compatibility. It was about positioning. I should have said something right then. I should have pushed back. But years of training don't disappear in one moment. So I did what I always did. I stayed quiet. But something shifted that night. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was just a small, uncomfortable realization sitting in the back of my mind. I didn't know what I wanted. Not really. Everything I'd done up to that point had been a reaction. To expectations. To pressure. To the idea of what my life was supposed to look like. I was successful on paper. Sûr. But if you asked me what made me happy, I probably would have given you an answer that sounded good instead of one that was true. And for the first time in my life, that bothered me. Because deep down, I knew exactly what my father expected me to do next. Meet Harrison. Smile. Play along. Get engaged within the year. Marry into a family that made sense. Expand the empire. Continue the legacy. It was clean. Efficient. Strategic. There was just one problem. I wasn't sure I wanted any part of it anymore. I remember staring at my phone that night. Harrison's name sitting there in my calendar like a meeting I couldn't cancel. And for the first time in years, I actually closed the app and walked out of my own life for a few hours. That's how I ended up in Brooklyn on a Tuesday afternoon. I wasn't supposed to have free. I just walked out of a meeting at the office, where my father had politely dismantled one of my campaigns in front of a room full of executives. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He just leaned back in his chair and said, "It's adequate." Like that was supposed to motivate me. So I left. No driver. No assistant. No schedule. Just me and a subway ride that felt weirdly normal. I got off near a small coffee shop I'd never noticed before. The kind of place my father would probably call charming, right before buying the building and turning it into something expensive. Mismatched chairs. Handwritten menu. People working on laptops, who didn't care who walked in. It was quiet in a way my life never was. I ordered a black coffee and sat in the corner. Mostly because no one was watching me there. And then I just sat. For a while. At some point, I realized I'd been stirring the same cup for way too long without taking a sip. I wasn't thinking about the meeting anymore. I wasn't even thinking about Harrison. I was just tired. Not physically. Just tired of being managed all the time. Rough day? I looked up. I was a little annoyed at first, because I wasn't used to strangers talking to me like that. But he didn't look like someone trying to impress me. He just looked curious. He was tall. Probably a little over 6 feet. Wearing a faded flannel shirt with grease stains on the sleeves. His hands weren't polished. They were the kind of hands that actually did things. And his smile was easy. Like he didn't need anything from me. That obvious? I asked. "You've been stirring that coffee for 10 minutes, he said, sliding into the chair across from me like it wasn't a big deal. Either it's the worst coffee in Brooklyn, or something else is going on. I should have told him to leave. That's what I would have done any other day. But I didn't. Work. I said, it's complicated. He nodded like he actually understood what that meant, even though there was no way he lived in the same world I did. Yeah, he said. That usually means it's not really about work. That caught me off guard. Most people in my life either tried to fix things or turn them into a conversation about themselves. He didn't do either. He just sat there like he had nowhere else to be. We ended up talking for 3 hours. I don't even remember everything we said. It wasn't about anything impressive. No deals. No connections. No strategy. He asked me what I liked to do when I wasn't working. I almost laughed because I didn't have a real answer. So, I made one up at first. The usual things. Travel. Reading. All the answers that sound good at dinner parties. He didn't react. He just watched me for a second and said, "That sounds like something you're supposed to say." I don't know why, but that broke something open. I don't actually know. I admitted. I've been busy. He didn't judge it. He didn't try to dig into it. He just nodded like that made sense too. I fix cars, he said, leaning back in his chair. Own a small shop in Queens. Nothing fancy, but it pays the bills. And when I'm not working, I usually just hang out. Eat somewhere good. Try not to overcomplicate things. There was something about the way he said it. No performance. No attempt to make it sound bigger than it was. What's your name? I asked. James, he said. James Carter. No pause. No recognition. No Ashford moment. I waited for it out of habit. The shift in tone. The slight change when people realize who I am. It didn't come. And you are? He asked. Fiona. That was it. No last name. No questions. No curiosity about my family or what I did. It should have felt strange. But it didn't. It felt quiet. In a good way. When we finally stood up to leave, the sun was already starting to set. He walked me to the subway like it was the most natural thing in the world. I had a good time, he said. Hands in his pockets. Me too, I said. And I meant it in a way I hadn't meant anything in a while. I don't care what your last name is, he added casually. Like it wasn't a big deal. I just want to know what makes you laugh. I don't think anyone had ever said that to me before. Not like that. We started seeing each other after that. Not in the way I was used to. No reservations weeks in advance. No curated experiences. We went to diners. Small restaurants. Places where the food was good, and nobody cared who you were. He always paid in cash. Just pulled out a folded stack from his wallet like it was nothing. I assumed he was just careful with money. Which made sense given what he did. And he never asked about mine. That was the part that stayed with me. He didn't try to impress me. He didn't try to figure out how I could benefit him. He didn't even seem curious about the parts of my life that everyone else focused on. He just paid attention to me. And once you've experienced that, it's hard to go back to anything else. I started looking forward to those moments more than anything else in my week. Not because they were exciting, but because they were real. No expectations. No pressure to perform. Just space. 6 months passed like that. 6 months of a life that didn't feel scheduled. 6 months of not being Richard Ashford's daughter. Every time I walked into a room, 6 months of being Fiona. And somewhere in the middle of that, I realized something I hadn't planned for. I was in love with him. Not the kind of love my father talks about. Not strategic. Not calculated. The kind that shows up quietly, and then suddenly becomes the only thing that makes sense. I tried to ignore it at first. Told myself it was temporary. That I was just reacting to everything else in my life. But it didn't go away. It got stronger. And the more time I spent with James, the clearer everything else became. The dinners with my family felt colder. The conversations at work felt scripted. Even the idea of meeting Harrison started to feel ridiculous. I couldn't unsee it anymore. I couldn't go back to pretending. So one night, sitting across from James in his small apartment in Queens, with takeout containers on the table and the TV playing, Something neither of us was really watching. I just said it. My father already has someone picked out for me. I told him. He didn't react right away. Just nodded slowly. Yeah, he said. I figured it wasn't going to be simple. It's not. I said. It's not just a preference. It's expected. And if I don't go along with it? I didn't finish the sentence. I didn't need to. He looked at me for a second. I really looked at me. Like he was deciding something. Then don't. He said. Just like that. No speech. No big emotional moment. Just 2 words that felt bigger than anything my father had ever told me. You don't understand? I said. This isn't something I can just walk away from. Maybe not, he said calmly. But you can decide what matters more. That stayed with me, not because it was dramatic, but because it was simple. For the first time, the choice wasn't being presented to me as a strategy. It was just a choice. And a few days later, sitting at that same dining table with my father, listening to him talk about my future like it was already finalized, I made a decision I knew would change everything. I can't make Saturday, I said, setting my fork down. He looked up slowly. I'm seeing someone, I added, my heart pounding in a way it hadn't in years. His name is James. That was the moment everything started to break. And for the first time in my life, I didn't try to fix it. My father didn't raise his voice when I said James's name. But the way he set his glass down told me I'd just crossed a line I wasn't supposed to see. James who? He asked. Like the answer might still be acceptable if I said it the right way. James Carter. I said. We've been seeing each other for 6 months. The silence at the table wasn't dramatic. It was controlled. My mother stopped moving. Derek didn't even look up from his phone. But I could tell he was listening. My father leaned back slightly, studying me, like I'd just presented a problem he hadn't accounted for. 6 months, he repeated. And you're telling me now? I didn't think I needed approval to date someone. That depends on who you're dating, he said. Calm as ever. What family is he from? He's not from a family, you know. Try me. I held his gaze. He owns an auto repair shop in Queens. That's when something shifted. Not anger. Not yet. Just a kind of quiet disappointment that felt worse than yelling. I'm a Hennick, he said. Yes. He nodded once. Like he'd just confirmed something he already suspected. Dinner's over, he said, standing up. Not to me. To the room. I'll be in my office. That was it. No argument. No scene. Just a decision. I knew that tone. It meant this wasn't finished. It meant it was about to begin. 3 days later, his assistant called and told me to come to his office. Not asked. Told. The corner office at Ashford Properties is designed to remind you who's in charge. Floor-to-ceiling windows. Skyline views. Everything expensive without trying too hard. I'd been in that room 100 times. But that day it felt different. There was a folder on his desk when I walked in. Close the door, he said without looking up. I did. He opened the folder slowly, like he was about to walk me through a presentation. James Carter, he read. 32 years old. Owns a 1-bedroom apartment in Queens. Current market value, under $400,000. Operates Carter's Custom Garage. Annual revenue, modest. He flipped a page. No significant assets. No family connections of note. No investments beyond a basic retirement account. He looked up at me. This is who you've chosen. He's a good man, I said. Good men don't build anything, he replied. They maintain. They survive. They don't create leverage. That's not what I care about. That's exactly the problem. He stood and walked toward the window, hands behind his back, like he was reviewing a city he owned. I had someone look into him, he continued. The best investigator in the city? I felt my stomach tighten. And do you know what he found? What? Nothing. My father said, turning back to me. No debts. No scandals. No hidden assets. No history worth mentioning. He is exactly what he appears to be. And that's bad? It's useless. I let out a breath. I didn't realize I'd been holding. He doesn't want anything from me. I said. He doesn't care about the name, the money, any of it. My father smiled. But it wasn't kind. Everyone wants something, he said. The only difference is when they show it. He slid the folder across the desk toward me. This ends now. I didn't touch it. No. The word felt strange coming out of my mouth in that room. His expression didn't change. But the air did. You don't understand the position you're in, he said. I understand it perfectly. Do you? He asked. Because, from where I'm standing, you're about to make a very expensive mistake. I'm not breaking up with him. He stared at me for a long second. Like he was recalculating something. Then let me make this simple, he said. If you continue this relationship, you will no longer have access to anything connected to this family. Financially, professionally, socially. I almost laughed. But it didn't feel funny. You're serious. I'm always serious. You'd cut me off over this? I would correct a bad decision before it damages the rest of the structure. That's how he saw it. Not as my life. As part of a structure. He's not a bad decision. I said, he's a liability. He's a person. To you? My father replied. To me. He's a risk. There it was. The line we couldn't cross. I'm not ending it, I said again. He nodded slowly. Like he'd expected that. Then we proceed accordingly. I left his office without taking the folder. I didn't hear from him for the rest of the day. Or the next. And then, things started to change. The first sign was small. I went to pay for something online and my card declined. I tried another one. Same result. I called the bank. Assuming it was a fraud alert or something routine, your account access has been updated. The representative told me. Updated how? The primary account holder has removed your authorization. Primary account holder. My father. I stood there in my kitchen, staring at my phone, waiting for the part where they told me it was temporary. It wasn't. Every account tied to him was gone. Credit cards. Backup accounts. The emergency fund my mother had always told me not to worry about. All of it. I hung up and just stood there for a minute, letting it sink in. He wasn't bluffing. Later that afternoon, I went into the office like nothing had happened. I had a meeting scheduled with a client. And for a second, I thought maybe this part of my life was still separate. It wasn't. People didn't look at me the same way. Conversations stopped when I walked into rooms. My boss pulled me aside before the meeting. Fiona, he said carefully. There's been a shift. In what? In your role here? What does that mean? It means we're reevaluating your position. For now, you won't be client-facing. I nodded slowly. Because of my father. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. By the end of the week, it got worse. Lunch plans canceled. Messages unanswered. People who used to text me daily suddenly had a lot going on. One of my friends finally said it out loud. My parents asked me to keep some distance for a while. She texted. You know how business is? Yeah. I knew exactly how business worked. It wasn't personal. It was strategic. Just like everything else in my father's world. By the time the weekend came, it was clear what he was doing. He wasn't just cutting me off. He was isolating me. Every system I'd been part of, every safety net I didn't even realize I had, was being removed one piece at a time. Not loudly. Not publicly. Just efficiently. I sat in my apartment that night, looking around at a life that suddenly didn't feel stable anymore. And for the first time, I understood what he meant by expensive mistake. He wasn't talking about money. He was talking about control. And he was willing to burn everything I relied on to keep it. That's when it hit me. This wasn't a disagreement. This was a war. And I was already in it. I remember standing in my closet, looking at rows of clothes I suddenly wasn't sure I could afford to keep, and realizing how fast a life can fall apart when it was never really yours to begin with. It didn't happen all at once. That would have been easier to process. It happened in small, quiet cuts that added up before I could stop them. By Monday, my access badge at the office stopped working. No warning. No meeting. Just a red light where there used to be a green one. I stood there for a second. Like maybe it was a glitch. It wasn't. Security walked over. Polite, but firm. And asked me to step aside. 5 minutes later, HR was explaining that my role had been restructured and that they'd be in touch about next steps. They never were. I didn't argue. I didn't make a scene. There's a point where you realize fighting it in that moment doesn't change anything. So I took my things, nodded like I understood, and walked out of the building I'd been working in for 3 years. No one stopped me. That was the part that stuck. Not one person. The silence followed me everywhere after that. Texts slowed down, then stopped. Group chats went quiet, like someone had flipped a switch. Invitations disappeared. People who used to wave across the room suddenly had somewhere else to look. It wasn't dramatic. No one called to say they were cutting me off. They just adjusted. I ran into one of my closest friends at a coffee shop a few days later. She smiled, hugged me, and then immediately started explaining why we couldn't hang out right now. "My dad does a lot of business with your father," she said, lowering her voice like we were discussing something illegal. "It's just complicated." I nodded like I got it. Because I did. It wasn't about me. It was about risk. And I was officially a bad investment. I tried not to take it personally. But that only works for so long. At some point, you stop telling yourself it's just business and start noticing how empty your phone feels. I applied to jobs. A lot of them. Marketing roles. Entry level. Mid-level. Anything that made sense with my experience. I had the degree. The background. The resume that used to get attention. Nothing came back. Not even rejections half the time. Just silence. The few responses I did get felt rehearsed. "We've decided to move forward with other candidates. We don't think this is the right fit at the moment." No explanation. No feedback. It didn't take long to figure out why. My last name used to open doors. Now it closed them. No one wanted to hire the daughter of a man they depended on. Especially when that man had clearly made his position known. I wasn't just unemployed. I was untouchable. I started cutting expenses without really thinking about it. Smaller things at first. Fewer dinners out. Canceling subscriptions I didn't need. Skipping things that used to feel normal. Then I looked at my apartment. The rent alone was more than most people make in a month. It had never been a problem before because it wasn't really my problem. Now it was. I ran the numbers 3 times, hoping they'd change. They didn't. I could maybe hold on for a few weeks. A month if I stretched it. After that, I'd be burning through whatever savings I had left. And those weren't exactly impressive without the accounts my father controlled. So I made the call. It wasn't dramatic. No tears. Just a quiet decision I knew I couldn't avoid. I needed to move. James didn't hesitate when I told him. "Come stay with me for now," he said. "We'll figure it out." I almost said no. Pride is funny like that. It shows up at the worst times. "I can't just move in," I said. "That's not fair." He looked at me like I'd said something confusing. "It's not about fair," he said. "It's about you having somewhere to go." I didn't have a better option. So, a week later, I packed up what I could fit into a few suitcases and left the apartment I'd been living in. No doorman. No black car waiting outside. Just me. A couple of bags. And a cab ride that felt longer than it should have. James's place in Brooklyn was different. Not in a bad way. Just honest. 2 bedrooms. Creaky floors. A small kitchen that actually looked like it got used. The building didn't have a lobby. No one opened doors for you. You carried your own things up the stairs. The first night, I stood in the living room, taking it in. No skyline view. No marble anything. No reminders of who my father was. Just a space that belonged to someone who lived in it. "It's not much," James said, watching my face carefully. I shook my head. It's enough. And I meant it. That was the strange part. I thought I'd feel like I'd lost everything. Like I'd stepped down into a life that didn't fit me. But standing there, I didn't feel that. I felt lighter. There was no pressure in that apartment. No expectation to perform. No invisible rules about how I was supposed to act or what I was supposed to represent. I could just exist. That didn't mean it was easy. At night, when everything got quiet, the doubt would creep in. I'd lie awake staring at the ceiling, going over everything I'd walked away from. The apartment, the job, the network, the safety net I never realized I depended on. And then the bigger questions would show up. What if my father was right? What if I'd made a decision I couldn't recover from? What if this wasn't brave? It was just stupid? I didn't say those thoughts out loud. I didn't need to. They were loud enough in my head. During the day, I kept moving. Applications, emails, calls that didn't go anywhere. I tried to treat it like a temporary situation, like something I could fix if I just worked hard enough. But every closed door made it harder to believe that. One night, I sat at the small kitchen table, laptop open, staring at another rejection email that didn't even bother explaining itself. I don't get it, I said, more to myself than to James. I did everything right. I have the degree, the experience. I know. I'm good at what I do. He didn't interrupt, just listened. So why does it feel like none of it matters now? I asked. Because it doesn't, he said calmly. I looked up. Not in the way you think, he added. You built everything in a system that wasn't really yours? Now you're outside of it. That stung. Mostly because it was true. So what am I supposed to do? I asked. He shrugged slightly. Figure out what's actually yours. It sounded simple. It wasn't. I'd spent so long building a life that fit into someone else's structure that I didn't even know what mine looked like without it. And for the first time, I had to find out. No backup plan. No safety net. Just me. And that was terrifying. But it was also the first time anything in my life felt real. I remember sitting at the small kitchen table one night, staring at my laptop, like it had personally offended me. When James quietly slid a plate of food next to me and didn't say a word. No, you should take a break. No, don't worry. You'll figure it out. Just food. I looked up at him. You didn't have to do that? I know, he said, grabbing a chair and sitting across from me. But you forgot to eat again. That was the thing about James. He noticed the small stuff. The things nobody in my old life ever paid attention to, because they weren't important enough to be strategic. I'd been used to grand gestures that came with expectations. Expensive dinners. Curated experiences. Gifts that felt more like statements than anything personal. With James, it was different. He didn't try to impress me. He just showed up. Every morning. He made coffee exactly the way I liked it without asking twice. Not because it was romantic, but because he paid attention the first time. If I had an early call, he'd already be up, moving around quietly, so he didn't wake me. If I stayed up too late working, he'd leave the light on in the hallway so I didn't walk into a dark apartment. None of it was dramatic, but it was consistent, and consistency is something you don't appreciate until you've lived without it. I was still sending out applications, still trying to figure out what came next. But the urgency started to feel different. Not less serious. Just less suffocating. Because for the first time, I wasn't dealing with everything alone. That didn't mean he tried to fix it. That's what surprised me the most. James never once offered to take care of everything or solve my problems for me. He didn't step in and say, "Don't worry. I've got it." He just made it clear he was there. There's a difference. One night, I was going through my finances, trying to make sense of numbers that didn't stretch the way they used to. Rent, food, basic expenses. It all added up faster than I liked. "I'll pay half," I said, not looking up from the screen. James leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "You don't have to." "I know," I said, "but I want to." He studied me for a second, like he was deciding whether to push back. Okay, he said finally. Then we'll figure out what that looks like. New argument? No, that's not necessary. No ego, just respect. That hit me harder than I expected. In my old life, everything came with a condition. If someone helped you, it meant something. It created a balance that had to be maintained. You owed something back, even if no one said it out loud. With James, there was none of that. If he did something for me, it was because he wanted to, not because it positioned him in a better place later. And if I wanted to contribute, heletme, no power struggle, no hidden meaning, just normal. It took me a while to get used to that. There were moments where I caught myself waiting for the other shoe to drop, for him to get frustrated, to question my decisions, to tell me I was handling things wrong. It never happened. Instead, he'd ask simple questions. What do you want to do? Not what makes sense. Not what's strategic. Not what someone else would approve of. Just what I wanted. And half the time, I didn't even know how to answer that. One afternoon, I came back from another unsuccessful meeting, one of the few places that had actually agreed to see me in person. I walked into the apartment, dropped my bag by the door, and just stood there for a second. How'd it go? He asked from the couch. They'll let me know, I said, which had basically become code for no. He nodded. Not pushing for more, I sat down across from him, leaning back into the chair. I feel like I'm starting over. I said, You are. He replied. That's not exactly comforting. He shrugged slightly. It's honest. I let out a short laugh. Do you always do that? Do what? Not sugarcoat things. Pretty much. I shook my head. But I was smiling. Most people in my life tried to manage my reactions. They'd soften things, frame them in a way that made everything sound controlled and predictable. James didn't do that. He didn't try to manage me. And weirdly, that made me feel more in control than anything else ever had. At night, when things got quieter, we'd sit on the small balcony outside the apartment. It overlooked a community garden. Nothing impressive. Just a few people growing things and taking care of something that mattered to them. It wasn't Central Park, but it felt more real. I used to think I knew exactly what my life would look like. I said one night, wrapped in a blanket against the cool air. And now? He asked. I'm not sure about anything. He nodded like that made sense. That's not a bad place to be. It doesn't feel great. It's not supposed to. He said. But it's yours. That word again. Yours. Not assigned. Not planned. Not approved. Just mine. I leaned my head back, looking out at the city lights in the distance. I don't think I've ever had that before, I admitted. He didn't respond right away. Just sat there next to me. Close enough that I could feel his presence without him needing to say anything. You do now, he said finally. It was simple. No big speech. No dramatic moment. Just a quiet statement that felt more solid than anything else in my life. There were still things about him that didn't fully add up. The late-night calls he'd take in the other room, speaking in a tone that sounded more focused than casual. The way he handled money, always cash. Always enough. Never worried. The occasional comment that didn't quite fit with the life he said he lived. I noticed it. I just didn't push. Not because I wasn't curious, but because for once, I didn't feel like I needed to control everything. And he never made me feel like I should. Whatever he wasn't telling me, it didn't change the way he treated me. And that mattered more. One night, I woke up around 2 a.m. and realized he wasn't in bed. I found him in the living room, phone to his ear, speaking quietly. We'll adjust the timeline, he was saying. Just don't move anything without clearing it first. He turned when he noticed me, ending the call quickly. Everything okay? I asked. Yeah, he said. A little too fast. Just work stuff. I nodded, even though something about it didn't quite fit. Come back to bed, I said. In a minute. I went back to the bedroom, but I didn't fall asleep right away. I wasn't suspicious exactly, just aware. There was more to him than he showed. But for once in my life, I wasn't trying to figure it out immediately. Because whatever it was, it didn't feel like a threat. It felt like something he'd tell me when it mattered. And until then, I was okay not knowing everything. That alone was new for me. Letting something exist without needing to control it. Letting someone be who they are without trying to define it. I'd spent my entire life in a world where everything had to make sense on paper. James didn't. And somehow, that made him the most real thing I had. I was adjusting the sleeve of my dress in the mirror when I realized my hands weren't shaking anymore. Which should have felt like a good sign. But it didn't. It felt like calm before something I couldn't name. Our wedding wasn't supposed to be a big deal. That was the whole point. James and I had planned something small, private, and honestly, quiet. A restaurant in Brooklyn we both liked. About 50 guests. Mostly people who actually knew us instead of people who knew our last names. No press. No spectacle. No strategy. Just a wedding. When we pulled up outside, I knew something was wrong before I even stepped out of the car. There were too many people, not just a few extra guests. A crowd. Valets. Black cars. People dressed like they were attending something much bigger than what we'd planned. Women in designer gowns. Men in tailored suits that probably cost more than the entire event. I didn't need to ask. I already knew who did this. "What is this?" I said quietly. Stepping out and scanning the entrance, James followed my gaze. His expression unreadable. "Looks like your father sent out invitations," he said. "That's not funny." "I'm not joking." We walked inside. And it got worse. Every table was filled. Not with our guests, but with his. My father's world had shown up like it owned the place, filling the room with conversations that sounded more like business meetings than a celebration. And right in the center of it, standing near the bar, like he was hosting the entire event, was my father. Perfect suit. Perfect posture. Glass of champagne in his hand. Perfect control. He smiled when he saw me. Like this was all exactly how it was supposed to go. "Surprise," he said as we walked up. "You didn't think I'd miss my only daughter's wedding, did you?" "What did you do?" I asked, not bothering to hide it. "I improved it," he said. "You were about to make this very small? I thought it deserved a proper audience." An audience. That's what this was to him. "You invited all these people?" "Of course," he said, glancing around the room. "Important people should witness important decisions." "This isn't a decision," I said. "It's my wedding." He smiled again. But there was something sharp behind it. "Exactly." I felt James's hand close around mine. Steady and warm. "We can leave," he said quietly. "Right now. We don't have to do this." I looked around the room again. At the cameras already out. At the whispers starting to build. At my father, standing there like he just set a stage and was waiting for the show to start. "No," I said. "Not this time. We're getting married," I added, squeezing his hand. "Whatever he's planning, we're not walking away." James nodded once. "Okay." The ceremony itself was strange. On the surface, it went exactly as planned. The officiant spoke. We stood there, said our vows, did everything we were supposed to do, but the room didn't feel like ours. It felt like we were performing for people who weren't there to celebrate us. Still, when I looked at James, none of that mattered for a second. His vows weren't polished. They weren't rehearsed. He didn't try to sound impressive. He just told the truth. "I'm not going to promise you a perfect life," he said, meeting my eyes. "I'm just going to promise that you won't have to live it alone." That was it. Simple. Real. And for that moment, everything else faded out. We were pronounced married. People clapped. Cameras flashed. For a few seconds, it actually felt like a wedding again. Then I heard the glass. That sharp, familiar clink that cuts through a room and demands attention. My father. Of course. He stood slowly, raising his glass like he'd been waiting for exactly this moment. "A toast?" he announced. his voice carrying easily across the room. The conversation stopped. Heads turned, phones lifted. Here it comes, I thought. To my daughter, he continued, looking directly at me. And her husband? The pause before that word wasn't subtle. I built everything I have from nothing, he said, pacing slightly as he spoke. Every deal, every dollar, every opportunity, and I always assumed that one day, my daughter would continue that legacy. I felt the room tighten around us. Instead, he went on, turning his attention to James. She chose this? A few people shifted uncomfortably. Others leaned in. A mechanic from Queens? He said, not even trying to soften it. A man with no background, no connections, and no understanding of the world he just walked into. There were a few quiet laughs. I felt it like a physical hit. This isn't about love, my father continued. It's about judgment. And today, my daughter has demonstrated a complete lack of it. Stop, I said, my voice sharper than I expected. He didn't. So let me be clear, he went on, louder now. From this moment forward, Fiona Ashford is no longer associated with this family. She is removed from my will, cut off from any financial interest in Ashford properties, and fully responsible for the consequences of this decision. There it was. Not just humiliation, exile. And he said it in front of everyone. Gasps. Whispers. Phones recording every second. Consider this a lesson, he added, lifting his glass slightly. When you choose poorly, you pay for it. The silence that followed felt heavy. Not dramatic. Just real. I could feel every eye in the room on me. Waiting for me to break, to apologize, to backtrack, to fix it. That's what they expected. That's what I would have done a year ago. But standing there, next to James, with everything already stripped away, something in me just stopped caring. I took a step forward. My father believes everything in life is a transaction, I said, my voice steady. That people have value based on what they can offer him. No one interrupted. I spent years trying to be enough in that system. I continued. The right school, the right job, the right image. And it was never enough. I looked at him, because it was never about me. His expression tightened. But he stayed quiet. Today, I chose something different, I said, tightening my grip on James's hand. I chose someone who doesn't treat me like an asset. I glanced around the room. If that cost me everything I was supposed to inherit, then maybe it was never mine to begin with. There was a shift in the crowd. Subtle, but there. Some people looked uncomfortable. Others, thoughtful. This isn't a tragedy, I added. It's a wedding. And if you're here to watch me fall apart, I'm sorry to disappoint you. I smiled slightly. But if you're here to celebrate, you're welcome to stay. For a second, no one moved. Then a few people stood up and left. Not many. Most stayed. That surprised him. I saw it in his face. He hadn't planned for that part. My father set his glass down hard enough to make a sound, then turned and walked out without another word. My mother followed, Derek right behind her. And just like that, the tension broke. Not all at once, but enough. Someone started clapping. Not polite. Real. Then more people joined in. The music picked up again. Conversation started back up. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours again. I turned to James, still standing there, like none of it had shaken him. You okay? I asked. He looked at me for a second, then smiled. Yeah, he said. You? I let out a breath. I didn't realize I'd been holding. Yeah, I said. I think so. But as the night went on, as people came up to congratulate us, like nothing had just happened, I couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger had been set in motion. My father thought he'd just ended something. He didn't realize he'd started it. I felt the room shift, the second my father walked out. Like the pressure finally dropped and everyone could breathe again. But the eyes were still on me, waiting to see what I'd do next. For a moment, I just stood there, holding James's hand, listening to the low hum of conversations starting back up, forks clinking against plates, people pretending that nothing unusual had just happened. That used to be my world. Ignore the uncomfortable. Smooth it over. Keep moving. I almost laughed. Not tonight. I stepped forward again. Not because I had something rehearsed, but because if I didn't say it now, I knew I never would. Hey, I said, just loud enough to cut through the noise. The room quieted again. Not completely, but enough. I'm not going to pretend that was normal, I added, a small smile slipping in. Or appropriate. Or, honestly, even surprising. A few people let out awkward laughs. That's my father, I said, consistent. If nothing else. More laughter this time. Softer. But real. I glanced around the room. At faces I recognized, and a lot I didn't. Most of you are here because of him. I continued. Business partners. Clients. People who've worked with him for years. So I get it. You probably expected me to either apologize or disappear. I shrugged slightly. Not happening. That landed. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just clear. I grew up in a world where everything had a price tag. I said, where every relationship came with conditions, and every decision had to make sense on paper. I paused, letting that settle, and for a long time, I played along. Because it was easier. Because it kept things comfortable. I glanced toward the door my father had just walked through. But comfortable isn't the same as right. No one interrupted. No one checked their phone. That alone told me I had their attention. When I told my father I was marrying James, it wasn't some rebellious phase. I said, it wasn't me trying to prove a point or make a statement. I tightened my grip on James's hand, feeling him there. Steady. It was the first decision I've ever made that was actually mine. That hit harder than anything else I'd said. Because it was true. I didn't choose my school. I went on. I didn't choose my career path. I didn't choose most of the things that shaped my life up to this point. A few people shifted. Uncomfortable. And I'm not saying that to complain. I added. I had opportunities most people don't get. I know that. I took a breath. But none of that means anything if you don't get to decide who you are. Silence. Not tense. Just focused. My father thinks I made a mistake. I said. That I picked the wrong person because he doesn't fit into his version of success. I turned slightly toward James. Here's what I actually chose. I continued. I chose someone who doesn't need me to be anything other than who I am. I looked back at the room. No condition. No expectations. No silent agreements about what I owe him in return. That got a reaction. Subtle. But there. Because people understood exactly what I meant. I chose someone who doesn't see me as an extension of his business. I added. A hint of sarcasm slipping in. Which, trust me, is a refreshing change. A few people laughed. More openly this time. And, yeah, I said, nodding once. He's not from the same world. He doesn't have the same connections. The same background. The same resume. I paused, letting that hang, but he shows up. I said simply, every day, in ways that actually matter. I could feel the shift now. It wasn't just attention. It was something closer to alignment. People weren't just listening anymore. They were relating, and if that makes me a bad investment. I continued, glancing briefly at where my father had been standing. Then I'm okay with that. That line landed exactly how I needed it to. No anger. No bitterness. Just certainty. I've spent most of my life trying to be enough for someone else's standards. I said, and the funny thing is, no matter what I did, it was always just, almost. I gave a small shrug. Almost impressive. Almost right. Almost worth it. A few heads nodded. I'm done with almost. I said, that was it. That was the turning point. Not the wedding. Not my father's speech. This, saying it out loud and actually meaning it. I don't need to be perfect. I added, I don't need to fit into a plan that was written for me before I knew I had a choice. I glanced around the room one more time. I just need to be honest about what I want. And for the first time, that didn't feel like a risk. It felt like control. Real control. Not the kind my father built his life on. Not something you take or enforce or negotiate. The kind you decide. I get that some of you might not agree with me, I said, and that's fine. You don't have to. I smiled slightly. But if you're still here, if you didn't walk out with him, I let that sit for a second, then you already understand more than you think. That was the moment the room fully shifted. Not dramatically. No applause yet, just a change in posture, in expressions, in the way people were looking at me, not like I was a problem, like I was a person. I stepped back, turning toward James. You still want to do this? I asked quietly. Just for him. He looked at me like that was the easiest question in the world. Yeah, he said. I do. Good, I replied, a small smile breaking through. Because I'm not starting over again. He let out a soft laugh. Wouldn't let you. I turned back to the room, the weight that had been sitting on my chest all night finally easing up. So here's what we're going to do, I said. We're going to finish this wedding. A few people smiled. We're going to eat the food we already paid for, I added. And that got a real laugh. And we're going to celebrate something that, for once, isn't about strategy. That did it? Someone clapped. Then another. It spread quickly. Not forced. Not Polita. Genuine. The music picked back up. Louder this time. Conversations restarted. But they sounded different now. Less cautious. Less filtered. People came up to us. On a B1. Not to apologize. Not to explain. Just to say congratulations. And for the first time that night, it actually felt like they meant it. I caught a glimpse of myself in the reflection of a window across the room. Same dress. Same setting. But I didn't look like the person who walked in a few hours ago. I looked steady. Not because everything was okay, but because I finally was. I was standing on the balcony that night, watching the city lights flicker across Brooklyn, when James stepped out behind me and said, "There's something I need you to see." And the way he said it made me stop asking questions for once. The weeks after the wedding felt calm on the surface. Too calm. My father had disappeared from my daily life. But his influence hadn't bucked. The fallout from the wedding spread fast. People talked. Videos circulated. And somehow, every version of the story made him look worse. That should have felt like a win. It didn't. Because nothing in my life was actually stable yet. I was still building from scratch. Still figuring out how to make something mine, without relying on the system I'd grown up in. Some days felt solid. Others didn't. James never changed. Same routine. Same calm. Same quiet confidence that I couldn't fully explain. But I started noticing things more clearly. The late-night calls weren't occasional anymore. They were consistent. Always short. Always focused. Never casual. The kind of conversations that didn't match someone running a small auto shop. Then there was the way people reacted to him sometimes. Not everyone. But every now and then, someone would look at him like they recognized something. Like they knew more than I did. I didn't push. Part of me didn't want to break whatever we had by turning it into an interrogation. But I knew something was coming. I just didn't know how big it was. A few days later, he handed me an envelope. Heavy paper. Clean. Expensive. The kind of thing you don't get by accident. What's this? I asked. En invitation. He said. I opened it. The Tech Charity Foundation Annual Gala. I read. At the Met? I looked up. Why are we going to this? He leaned against the counter, watching me. Because it's time. For what? For you to see the rest of my life. That was it. No explanation. No build-up. Just that. I should have pushed harder. Asked more questions. Instead, I just nodded. Okay. The night of the gala. I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting a dress I knew cost more than anything I'd bought in the past few months combined. "Where did you even get this?" I asked. James smiled slightly. "I have my ways." That didn't help, but I let it go. Again, we pulled up to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and the scale of it hit me immediately. This wasn't just a charity event. This was power. Hundreds of people. Industry leaders. Politicians. Investors. The kind of crowd my father thrived in. For a second, I felt like I'd stepped back into my old life. Then James stepped out of the car and offered me his hand. And the way people looked at him when we walked in, that wasn't my world. That was his. Heads turned. Conversations paused. Not dramatically. Just enough to notice. People nodded at him as we passed. Some with respect. Some with something closer to recognition. I felt it immediately. Something was off. "You know people here," I said quietly. "A few," he replied. That wasn't an answer. We moved through the room, and I started catching pieces of conversations. Didn't think he'd actually show up. First public appearance. Right? This changes everything. I looked at James. "What are they talking about?" He glanced at me. "Calm as ever. You'll see." Of course, we reached the main hall just as the lights dimmed slightly. An announcement echoed through the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, if you could please take your seats." A large screen lit up at the front, displaying a sleek logo I didn't immediately recognize. Nexus AI Technologies. I'd heard the name before. Everyone had. It was everywhere in the business news lately. Fast growth. Massive valuation. Something about a founder no one had ever seen publicly. I didn't think much of it, until I noticed my father across the room. He was seated near the front, leaning forward. Completely focused. That caught my attention. I hadn't spoken to him since the wedding, but I knew that look. That was his deal-making face. The one he used when something big was about to happen. I followed his line of sight back to the stage. "And now," the host continued, "for the first time, we're honored to welcome the founder and CEO of Nexus AI Technologies." The room shifted. Not loud. Just anticipation. I turned to James. "Do you know who this is?" I asked. He didn't answer. Instead, he reached for my hand, squeezed it once, and let go. "Watch," he said. The spotlight hit the stage. For a second, no one moved. Then someone stepped out of the shadows, and my brain just stopped, because it was him, James, walking onto that stage, like he'd been doing it his entire life. The room exploded into applause, real applause. Not Polita, not strategic, genuine. I didn't move. I couldn't. On the screen behind him, his name appeared in clean, sharp letters. James Carter, CEO and founder, Nexus AI Technologies. I felt something drop in my chest. Like everything I thought I understood, just shifted at once. The late-night calls, the confidence, the way people looked at him, it all snapped into place. I just hadn't seen it, because I wasn't looking for it. He started speaking. Calm. Clear. Completely in control. Talking about innovation. Growth. Responsibility. The kind of speech that held a room without trying too hard. But I barely heard it, because I was watching my father. Richard Ashford was frozen. Not in a dramatic way. Just still. His expression had gone completely blank. Like his brain was trying to catch up and couldn't. My mother leaned toward him, saying something I couldn't hear. He didn't respond. Derek was staring at the stage, like he'd just seen something impossible. For the first time in my life, my father didn't look like he knew what was happening. And that was new. When James finished, the room stood. A full standing ovation. 500 of the most powerful people in that room, on their feet, applauding the man my father had called a mechanic with nothing to offer. I felt a laugh build in my chest, but it didn't come out. It wasn't funny. It was perfect. James stepped off the stage and walked straight toward me, toward us, toward my father. Every step felt deliberate, controlled. He stopped right in front of him, Mr. Ashford, he said, his voice calm. Professional. I believe you wanted to discuss a partnership. My father blinked once. Just once. Then he stood up, adjusting his jacket like he could reset the moment. James, he said, forcing a smile. I had no idea. About what? James asked. That you were. This? My father replied. James tilted his head slightly. I'm the same person I was last week. That landed. Hard. The only difference? James added. Is now you know what I'm worth? Silence. Not awkward. Heavy. My father's smile tightened. Well? He said, recovering just enough. This is impressive. We should talk. There are opportunities here that could benefit both of us. There it was. Back to business. Back to strategy. James reached into his pocket, pulled out a card, and held it out. Here's my contact information, he said. My father took it, like he'd taken 1,000 business cards before. But this one felt different. Unfortunately, James continued, we won't be moving forward with Ashford Properties. My father's expression slipped. Just for a second. I'm sorry, he said. We've decided to partner elsewhere. James said, we prefer working with people who align with our values. Values. That word hit harder than anything else. My father stared at him, searching for something to say. For once, he didn't have it, and standing there, watching it happen, I realized something. This wasn't revenge. It was reality catching up, and my father had no control over it. I watched my father's hand tighten around that business card. And for the first time in my life, he didn't look like the most powerful person in the room. He looked exposed. The conversation around us didn't stop. But it changed. People weren't just networking anymore. They were watching, listening, calculating, and word spreads fast in a room like that. By the time James and I stepped away, I could already feel it moving. Quiet conversations, subtle glances, people connecting dots in real time. My father wasn't just another executive in that moment. He was the man who had publicly humiliated the CEO standing on that stage. And now everyone knew. We didn't stay much longer. There was no reason to. The point had been made without either of us forcing it. On the drive home, I sat there in silence, trying to process everything that had just happened. You okay? James asked, one hand on the wheel, the other resting casually near mine. I married a mechanic. I said, apparently. I also married a tech CEO. He smiled slightly. I told you I'd explain. You didn't exactly lead with that. I needed to know you weren't with me for the wrong reasons. I looked at him. You thought I was after your money? I thought you were used to a certain world, he said. And I didn't want to be part of that. I let out a quiet breath. Well, I said, leaning back in the seat. You definitely handled that. He glanced at me. You mad? I shook my head. No, I said. Just surprised. That was the truth. Not angry. Not betrayed. Just aware that everything had shifted again. And this time, it wasn't me falling. It was him. My father. The fallout started before we even got home. By the next morning, the video from our wedding, the one where my father stood up and called James a mechanic with nothing to offer, was everywhere. Except now it had context. Now people knew who James actually was. Clips spread across social media, business forums, even mainstream news outlets. Headlines wrote themselves. Real estate mogul insults son-in-law. Turns out he's a billionaire tech CEO. That kind of story doesn't stay quiet. I sat at the kitchen table with my phone in my hand, scrolling through articles I didn't ask for, but couldn't ignore. Every version of it made my father look worse. Not because people were attacking him, because they were quoting him. That's the thing about saying exactly what you think in public. You don't get to take it back when the context changes. Within days, the consequences started showing up in ways my father couldn't control. The Nexus AI deal was officially off the table. That alone was big enough. $50 million gone because of one decision. But it didn't stop there. Two of his long-term partners announced they were reevaluating their positions. One investor pulled out of a major project, not dramatically, just enough to make a statement. No one said it directly. They didn't need to. Trust had shifted. And in his world, that's everything. I didn't hear this from him. I heard it the same way everyone else did. Through other people, through headlines, through the kind of quiet updates that mean more than any official statement. The man who controlled everything suddenly couldn't control the narrative. And that was new. 3 days after the gala, Derek showed up at our apartment. Actually showed up. Not a text. Not a call. He rang the doorbell like we were normal people. James opened the door. I stayed where I was, watching from the kitchen. Hey. Derek said, shifting his weight slightly, like he wasn't sure how to stand in this space. Can I come in? James stepped aside without saying much. Derek walked in, looking around like he'd just entered a completely different reality. This is nice, he said. I almost laughed. Why are you here? I asked. He looked at me, then at James, then back at me. I wanted to talk, he said. About everything. Be specific. He ran a hand through his hair. Look. I said some things. He started. The posts. The comments. It was stupid. That's one word for it. I'm serious, he said quickly. I didn't know. Didn't know what? I asked. That he was rich? He hesitated. That changes things. No, I said, shaking my head. It changes how you see things. Silence. Derek looked at James. Look, man, I think we got off on the wrong foot, he said. There's a lot we could do together. Business-wise, connections, partnerships. There it is. James cut in. Calm but direct. Derek paused. What? You're not here to apologize. James said. You're here because you see an opportunity. That's not. It's exactly what it is. Derek's expression tightened. We're family, he said. James nodded once. No, he replied. You're people who share a last name. That landed harder than anything else. Derek looked at me, like he expected me to step in. I didn't. You made your choice? I said. So did I? He stood there for a second, like he was waiting for something to change. Nothing did. Okay, he said finally, nodding once. I get it. He didn't. But that was fine. He left without another word. And just like that, the first reconnection attempt ended. My mother took a different approach. She called. More than once. I didn't answer at first. Then I did. Fiona, she said, her voice softer than usual. How are you? I leaned against the counter. I'm fine. We've been worried. Have you? A pause. Of course we have, she said. You're still my daughter. That line would have worked a month ago. Not anymore. What do you want? Mom? Another pause. Longer this time. I just think maybe we all overreacted, she said carefully. Things got out of hand. They didn't get out of hand. I said, they were very intentional. She exhaled. Your father is under a lot of pressure right now. I almost smiled. I'm sure he is. You know he hasn't officially finalized everything yet, she added. There's still time to reconsider. There it was. Not concern. Negotiation. You want me to undo my marriage? I said. I want you to think about your future. I am, I replied. For the first time. Silence. You don't have to struggle like this, she said. Not when there are other options. I thought about James. About the apartment. About everything I'd built in the past few months. I'm not struggling. I said, you don't have to prove anything. I'm not proving anything. I replied. I'm choosing something. That ended the conversation. Not dramatically. Just done. My father didn't call. Not right away. But I knew he would. Because people like him don't disappear. They adapt. The difference was, this time, I wasn't waiting for his next move. For the first time, I wasn't reacting. I was just standing where I chose to stand and watching everything else shift around me. I was reviewing a client proposal at my own desk when I realized no one had approved it but me. And for the first time, that felt normal. Thornton Creative started as a name on a spreadsheet and a logo I designed at 2 in the morning. I named it after my grandmother, her last name. Not ours, because it felt like the first decision that didn't need permission. The first client was the same Brooklyn coffee shop where I met James. They didn't care about my last name. They cared that I showed up, listened, and got results. From there, it grew the unglamorous way, one client at a time. A bookstore that needed help with online sales. A small restaurant in Queens that wanted better visibility. A startup that couldn't afford a big agency, but needed someone who would actually pick up the phone. I priced fairly, delivered on time, and didn't disappear when things got messy. Word of mouth did the rest. 3 months in, I had enough work to stop checking my email every 5 minutes. 6 months in, I hired my first contractor. A year later, we had 15 people, designers, writers, a project manager who kept everything from falling apart, and a real office in a co-working space in Soho. No marble floors, no assistant screening my calls. Just a place where people did their jobs well. And it worked. Not because I was suddenly a different person, but because I was finally building something that didn't depend on my father's network. When a client renewed, it wasn't because of a connection. It was because we delivered. That changed how I saw everything. I still lived in the same Brooklyn apartment with James. Same creaky floors. Same small kitchen. Same balcony that overlooked the garden. We upgraded a few things over time. Better chairs. A real desk. A coffee machine that didn't sound like it was dying, but the point wasn't to turn it into something else. It already was what we needed. James still spent weekends at the garage. I went with him sometimes, mostly handing him tools and asking questions I should have learned years ago. It was grounding in a way I didn't expect. No titles. No strategy. No one trying to read into every move. Just work. People like to ask if I felt different after everything that happened. Like there was a moment where I suddenly arrived somewhere. There wasn't. It was gradual. Small decisions that stacked up. Saying no when I used to say yes. Charging what my work was worth. Walking away from clients who treated us like we were replaceable. That last part took practice. Boundaries don't show up fully formed. You build them. One uncomfortable conversation at a time. My mother tried again a few months later. Shorter calls. Fewer assumptions. Still careful with her words. I kept it simple. If you want to be in my life, I told her, it's not going to be on your terms or his. She didn't argue. That was new. We spoke occasionally after that. Nothing deep. Just enough to see if something could be rebuilt without the old rules. I didn't rush it. You don't fix years of behavior with a few polite conversations. My father took longer. He showed up one afternoon without calling. No driver. No schedule. No performance. Just him. Standing at the door, like he wasn't entirely sure how to start. Can I come in? He asked. That alone told me something had changed. I stepped aside. He looked around the apartment, taking it in without commenting. No quick assessments. No comparaison. Just observation. I've lost 3 partnerships this week, he said after a moment. Like he was reporting numbers. The Nexus deal is gone. The board is reconsidering my position. He let out a short laugh. Turns out, public statements have consequences. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. I was wrong, he said finally. He didn't dress it up. No explanation. No attempt to soften it. About him? He added. About you? I'd waited a long time to hear that. When it finally came, it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like information. I'm not here for an apology, I said. He nodded slowly. Then what are you here for? I thought about it. Clarity, I said. I need you to understand something. He looked at me. Actually listening. I was happy before I knew what James did. I said, before any of that? Not because of what he has, but because of how he treats me. He didn't interrupt. That doesn't change based on money. I added. And it doesn't go away if everything else does. He took that in. I don't know how to operate without structure. He admitted. I'm not asking you to change everything overnight. I said, I'm asking you to stop treating me like a project. Another pause. I can try? He said. That was honest. Not perfect. Not complete. But real. That's enough for now. I replied. We didn't hug. We didn't suddenly fix anything. We just sat there for a few minutes. Talking about neutral things. Work. Weather. The kind of conversation that would have been meaningless before, but felt like progress now. After he left, I stood by the door for a second, letting it settle. Feels different, James said from the kitchen. It is, I replied. Better? I thought about it. Healthier, I said. Not easier. He nodded like that made sense. It did. A few weeks later, we signed our biggest contract yet. A year-long campaign with a company that didn't care about my last name or my past. They cared about results. We gave them results. That night, we celebrated at home. Takeout. A bottle of wine. Nothing fancy. Any regrets? James asked, leaning back in his chair. I thought about the penthouse, the accounts, the network that used to define my life. Then I thought about everything I had now. Not a single one. I said, that was the truth. If you take anything from my story, let it be this. First, don't let anyone decide your value based on what you can offer them. Not your family. Not your job. Not anyone. Second, pay attention to how people treat you when there's nothing to gain. That tells you more than anything they say when things are going well. And third, real stability isn't built on control. It's built on choices you can stand behind when things get uncomfortable. If you've ever had to choose between what was expected and what actually felt right, you already know how that plays out. The difference is whether you act on it. Thanks for listening.